This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. Hey everyone, Jody Avirgan here. This is another episode in what we are calling our Some Sunday Context series, where we're trying to give you some episodes from the archives and some new conversations that put what we are going through today in some historical context. Today, pretty straightforward. We are about to celebrate, Monday in fact, the 100th birthday of Malcolm X. So we thought we'd bring you an episode we did about a year and a half ago about Malcolm X's death. The moment of his assassination says a lot about the life he led and the impact he had and his legacy. So there will surely be a lot of coverage of X's 100th birthday coming up. There's also a couple big new books about him. So maybe this episode will help give you some context. Take a listen. We will be back with a brand new episode on Tuesday. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X is preparing to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights in Manhattan. Ahead of his speech, X is shot multiple times and killed. The autopsy identified 21 gunshot wounds to the chest, left shoulder, arms, and legs, including 10 buckshot wounds from a sawed-off shotgun that was used in the attack and was the first weapon to be fired. We'll get into the timeline of how we got to this moment, and then, of course, talk about the assassination itself. But for some context and some sort of real gut punch context, just a week earlier, X had given an interview in which he said, quote, "No one can get out without trouble, and this thing with me will be resolved by death and violence." And that is indeed what happened on this day, February 21st, 1965. I will also say there is a big, over 50-year-long legacy and hook to this story as well. That is that just in the last few years, two of the three men who were convicted of that crime and maintained their innocence from day one were finally formally exonerated. So let's go to that day of Malcolm X's assassination here. As always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kelly Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So there are two big forces, I would say, in Malcolm X's life at this point, or around Malcolm X at this point, which is his split from the Nation of Islam, and then certainly pressure and meddling from the FBI. Those feel like the two big things. But, keeping those in mind and then returning to this quote of his, "This thing with me will be resolved by death and violence." I mean, what is X's mindset and position at that point that he would just so plainly state it that way?
I mean, his break with the Nation of Islam was not good. I mean, It was catastrophic, I think, for the Nation of Islam. He was their number one spokesperson. In a lot of ways, aside from Elijah Muhammad himself, people saw Malcolm X as the leader of, their religion. And so when he winds up leaving, not only is it something that causes this huge rift, but he is, constantly harassed. He is threatened all the time that they are going to kill him. That sort of iconic sort of poster of Malcolm X where he's like looking out of the window with a shotgun ready. People have seen that sort of poster. But he's not looking for like the Klan. He's actually looking for the Nation of Islam. That's what people don't realize, is that it was his own people that were trying to kill him because they could not reconcile the Nation of Islam without him, but they also could not control him within the Nation of Islam as well.
And you think about someone like Malcolm X in this era who has just a lot of targets on his back. I mean, obviously, the Nation of Islam, as Kelly was saying, but, Medgar Evers had been assassinated in 1963. King would be assassinated a few years later. Being a visible Black leader in the 1960s, especially somebody like Malcolm X, who was considered by many white people to be radical and violent and sort of the figurehead for their sort of worst fears about Black power. And it's kind of a miracle he makes it to 1968. And I think it's surprising to a lot of people that he wasn't killed by white racist, or, the FBI, as we know at this time, was also trying to encourage the deaths of black leaders, and would be involved in some in the 70s. So,
I don't love to psycho theorize on this show too much, but is it the case that X was like, there's any number of people who would like me dead, or did he really feel like the Nation of Islam split was the kind of
I would say it's all of the above. I would say, the FBI had wiretaps on everyone in the 1960s, but certainly Malcolm X was one of them. I do think that he feared the Nation of Islam more because I think he feared that the FBI and the Nation of Islam would almost be working hand in hand in order to accomplish this murder. And so you kind of can't tease out the two groups when you think about who wanted his death the most, because in some instances, they're in cahoots together. You look at sort of the receipts and it's like the police and the FBI and the Nation of Islam, all of them are either at this event or choose to not be at the event because they know what's going to take place at the event.
Yeah. A larger sort of thing I've been thinking about with a number of the assassinations and attempted assassinations we talked about on the show, maybe it's not a surprise, but, I do feel like often when we talk about those moments, we also realize that people kind of knew that those were the stakes, right? And they often felt like that, maybe actually the attempted assassination on FDR that we just did like last week is an exception where like it probably was kind of out of nowhere for everyone. But I think X felt it especially acutely, but it is an interesting thing I've noticed as a through line that people realize, that they're in the crosshairs, so to speak.
Yeah, that their days are numbered.
And moreover, in X's case, right, February 14th, which is just a week before this killing, his home is destroyed in a fire. He is, he is in this moment. So let's go to that day, February 21st. As I said, he's addressing about 400 people at the Organization of Afro-American Unity. There's no footage of the incident itself. It's recreated in Malcolm X, the movie, which we can talk about. I watched that scene earlier today. But what do we know about the kind of TikTok of what went down on that day and how he ended up being killed?
It's interesting. There are people who told him all throughout leading up to this event, you shouldn't have it. You shouldn't speak. This is not a good opportunity. This could be dangerous. And he insists on speaking. And it's about a 400-person audience in the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. And as he just approaches the podium to speak, someone stands up in the middle of the crowd, yells out a racial slur and says, "Get your hand out of my pocket." And within moments after that, people are sort of like, what is going on? Shots break out. And as you mentioned earlier, Jody, 21 times. That is a lot of times to be shot. This was clearly an assassination. They wanted him dead. And that's exactly what happens. People wind up leaving. They're screaming. They're trying to chase who they think the shooter is. It's not clear who the shooter is. And it is chaos.
Yes, they create this distraction. In the movie, actually, funnily enough, there's actually like a flare. Like someone throws a flare and it creates this. I don't know if that happened, but, Spike Lee's allowed his artistic rendering. But they create a distraction. There's a scuffle. The bodyguards get distracted. That's the main thing. And then I think someone who's basically sitting in the first or second row pulls a sawed-off shotgun out, walks right up to the lectern, shoots, I think it's twice, kind of through the lectern, but right into Malcolm X's chest. And then, yes, two other people with pistols then come and fire, as you said, an enormous number of rounds into him after that. So it's like there's three different weapons that he ends up being hit by, and then there's this huge scuffle. And interestingly, there is footage of right outside, right afterwards, and this scene of like people chasing who they think did it and beating them up and jumping all over them in the chaos. So we have a little glimpse of it. But,
and his wife and children are there too. His wife and daughters are in that auditorium as well. The traumatic event that takes place is it knows no gravity.
Yeah.
And to provide just a little bit of context why he was being warned off from doing this event, he's speaking in Harlem. And this is also where the headquarters of Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam is. And there had been this kind of rift or criticism or division among Black activists. The Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad is one of the central parts of James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, right? That's The Fire Next Time, Nation of Islam, who he sees as particularly violent and a real problem. He wants to direct civil rights activism and the civil rights movement away from that direction. But he's also like, that's where we're going to end up if there aren't some major changes in U.S. policy, in ending discrimination, in responding to the needs of more moderate civil rights leaders. And so that the Nation of Islam, I think, is kind of both in the background and sort of at the corners of how people are thinking and talking about the Black freedom struggle in the 1960s, both within Black communities and in white communities, because they're also the center of a documentary called something like The Hate That Hate Creates, which is where they kind of also become, and Malcolm X becomes a kind of boogeyman in the white American imagination at this point.
Hey there, it's David Plotz, host of Slate's Political Gabfest, the longest-running politics podcast. It can be hard to know what news is worth your attention, which is why every week my co-hosts Emily Bazelon and John Dickerson and I find the most important stories of the week so you don't have to. We dig into everything from Trump's immigration policies to critical court cases and everything in between. We also keep some good humor while doing it.
Why is the Tic Tac shaped that way?
Listen to the Political Gabfest now and join us as we go even deeper on the daily news you're already following. That's Political Gabfest, wherever you get your podcasts.
Tariffs, meme coins, Girl Scout cookies. What do these all have in common? Come on, folks. It's all about the money. Economics is everywhere and everything. It's fueling our lives, even where we least expect it. And look, if you listen to This Day, that means I know that you are interested in context and the hidden stories that help explain our world. So I recommend to you that you listen to Planet Money from NPR. The Planet Money is a different kind of world where the complex economy actually makes sense. Human stories instead of abstract theories. It is econ brought down to earth. For me, going all the way back to 2008 and the giant pool of money, where Planet Money first helped me understand the financial crisis, I have relied on this show. It is accessible, it is fun, it's surprising. It's one of those shows that when you listen to it, you kind of think to yourself, why isn't this the only show that I listen to? Another great thing I'll tell you about Planet Money, they are absolute pioneers in the shorter podcast. It's about 30 minutes. You'll learn a lot. You get in, get out, nice and accessible. So it's time to check it out. Tune in to Planet Money every week for entertaining stories and insights about how money shapes our world. These are stories that cannot be found anywhere else. Listen now to Planet Money from NPR. So here's something that happens every year as it gets warmer. I put away my winter clothes, I take a look at my closet, and I think to myself, man, my rotation is pretty worn out. Same polos, same shorts, same lightweight pants as last year. So I have to buy a bunch of items to feel like I'm ready to embrace summer. Now, let me tell you about something that doesn't happen every year. Me getting compliments on the summer clothes that I purchased. But I am here to tell you, listener, that it has been happening ever since I refreshed my wardrobe with some items from Quince. Just last week on a taping of this show, Kelly said, "That's a really nice polo shirt." It is, and it's actually called a cotton silk polo sweater. It's got a nice little white trim, some great texture to the material. I've got these linen pants that are getting some compliments. They cost under $50, by the way. Same with the chore jacket I got. A friend of mine at the bar the other day reached over and did that little, ooh, this is nice thing, and felt the fabric. Listeners, this could be you. Quince's pieces are easy, elevated, and somehow make you feel more put together without even trying. Treat your closet to a little summer glow up with Quince. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/thisday for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday.
Yeah. It's also interesting, too, because I don't think people realize people are so familiar with sort of Malcolm X of the Nation of Islam. But when he leaves the Nation of Islam and he takes his Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca and he winds up changing his name to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz and he converts to Sunni Islam, he has a completely different perspective or viewpoint about how he sees the Black freedom struggle playing out. He becomes much more inclusive in the way that he starts to think about how this liberation will unfold. He starts his own secular organization called the Organization of African American Unity. And he really starts to open up his speech more to talk about not just the violence of like racism against Black people, but the harms and violence of racism against people of color all over the world. So that, I think we oftentimes forget, and it's not shown in the movie, that, Yuri Kuchiyama, who's a Japanese-American activist, is literally cradling Malcolm X's head in her lap. She became one of his right-hand, women and leaders. And it showed just how much he was pivoting toward this more multicultural movement toward liberation for everyone that gets left out of the narrative when we talk about him.
Yeah. The chaos in the aftermath, obviously it's chaotic, no surprise. It sort of plays out up and down the line. So there's the chaos of just like the crime scene itself, which is just not preserved. There's this stunning fact that there was a dance in that ballroom 3 hours later.
That's crazy.
Which is just crazy. It is just insane. I didn't realize that.
How do you sweep up bullets?
Right? But talk about like the police not taking it seriously. What were the people doing who were dancing in there? Or who were dancing?
Someone someone could have told them. I'm sure they knew.
Right.
Hey, there were
probably
Malcolm X was killed.
Bullet holes in the wall, right? Or in the floor or whatever. I know. Yeah. Just what a scene that must have been. But then, the chaos also goes into just the framing immediately of what happens in the aftermath of this. You have like James Farmer, for instance, who we've mentioned on the show a number of times, but the leader of the Congress of Racial Equality. He goes at a news conference a day or two later and says that it's actually local drug dealers, not the Nation of Islam, that are to blame. Obviously, there's some spinning there, but make the list of people who all of a sudden people are saying are responsible for this: drug dealers, Nation of Islam, the NYPD, the FBI, the CIA. How did people get into this ballroom so easily with weapons? The police must have been involved or whatever. I guess I don't know what you would expect, but it does feel like everyone is trying to then take this vacuum of confusion and find their wedge.
Yeah. And there still are a lot of conspiracy theories about what took place, who was the actual killer, that, the people who are in jail aren't actually the ones who committed the crime. There's, in Manny Marable's magnum opus, his book, his biography of Malcolm X, he sort of pokes holes in a lot of these narratives about what really happened with his assassination and what role the Nation of Islam played.
Does he kind of land somewhere?
Yeah, he does. He says that, the FBI was involved, the Nation of Islam was involved. He says that people who were imprisoned were like the fall guys. They weren't the actual people that committed the crime, which would speak for the exonerations that came later. But that this was all a huge cover-up, and that the local police played a role in it. And it's a mystery that has still somewhat not been solved.
And given how many potential people it could have been, it is really remarkable that in just over the course of a year, they're able to arrest 3 men, Mujahid Abdul Halim, Muhammad Abdul Aziz, and Khalil Islam. They arrest the 3 of them, they put them on trial, they sentence them to life in prison, all within a year of the assassination. And so even though there's there are a lot of different people who could be responsible for this, it was kind of an open and shut case when it came to law enforcement and criminal prosecution system.
Yeah. We could maybe should do a proper episode on the fight by 2 of those 3 men for their freedom and eventual exoneration just a few years ago. But from the very beginning, Mr. Aziz and Islam basically had airtight alibis. Aziz in particular, was home with his family. He has said, in the years since, he's basically been like, everyone but the white people on the jury believed me. Like people within the Nation of Islam, the Black community. It was just like the only people who didn't have faith were the people who had the power to jail him for life. And even as clearer and clearer information came out that he just was not in that room that day, he still remained jailed for decades and decades. Khalil Islam, who was Malcolm X's driver and was also, now we know, one of the wrongly accused. He died, but was in 2020 posthumously exonerated. There's a Netflix documentary, I believe, called Who Killed Malcolm X, that goes through some of these and profiles some of them. But Muhammad Aziz in particular is just a really kind of remarkable figure and has really helped shine a light on the miscarriage of justice that took place here, but not necessarily cleared up. Knowing exactly what went down on that day.
And we should definitely do a separate episode on this, but I think it is worth just mentioning that one of the reasons the prosecution went so quickly is because, as the later investigation finds, the FBI and the NYPD withheld exonerating evidence. They hid the evidence that would have shown that these men weren't responsible. And so that also becomes part of their exoneration and then the restitution that the city makes to their families.
And there's no way you can have an investigation when you have a ballroom party dance like 3 hours after the assassination. I mean, there's so many things here that just should not have happened.
Yeah. Another important thing to point out, and I think the story of Malcolm X is often kind of how the inner circle sees him and how the press and the outer and the public sees him in the public imagination. And I think the movie does a very good job of that, and much of the story of Malcolm X is about that and that gap. But to show you kind of that in the wake of the assassination, a lot of the press, including like the New York Times, is still vilifying him. And I mean, the Times' editorial in the day after he dies says, "Yesterday someone came out of the darkness that he spawned and killed him." I mean, can you imagine that being the thing that you write in a paper the day after a leader is killed? I mean, it's kind of stunning. Final thing is there is a funeral February 27th. There's a public viewing. Tens and tens of thousands of mourners are there. John Lewis, Bayard Rustin, James Foreman, James Farmer, Jesse Gray, Andrew Young are there. MLK sends a telegram to Betty Shabazz. Is there any healing of rifts? Is there any sort of like moment of pause, as fractious as we sort of painted the picture before his assassination? What is the aftermath within the Black civil rights leadership community?
I mean, it's a huge loss. And so, as Nikki was mentioning earlier, you have the assassination of Medgar Evers, and then you have Malcolm X, and then 3 years later, you have the assassination of Martin Luther King. And in a lot of ways, their wives, their widows, really do come together and have this bond and this friendship that really solidifies them for the rest of their lives. But it does feel like the movement is being chipped away with each assassination. And by the time you get to King's assassination, it's only maybe a few years after that before the movement is sort of no longer.
All right. Well, that will bring us to the end of the episode. I'm really glad we got to this, and I think there are, a few other Malcolm X stories to follow up on for sure. But I think we were both saying, Kelly, before taping, that I think we both want to go watch that movie again. I know it's problematic, and maybe we'll do an episode about the movie itself, which was like a political phenomenon. So maybe we'll do that. But we will leave it there. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kelly Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.